Day 5 of the American Cup saw the start of the Champions Bracket Finals, as well as the return of the Elimination Bracket, which ended up featuring one of the absolute wildest matches in American Cup history. Hello folks, I'm International Master Kostya Kavutskiy, and I'll be recapping all of the action from the 2024 American Cup hosted here in St. Louis. Now, starting with the results from the Champions Bracket, Levon Aronian started off with 2-0 score against Ray Robson in their final, winning both the first classical game as well as the first rapid game in their 4-game match. Irina Krush also took the lead in her final against the youngster Alice Lee, 1.5, 0.5 after winning the classical game and then squandering a completely winning position in that second rapid game to give Alice that half point. Going over to the elimination bracket, Wesley So knocked out Sam Sevian after losing the first game in their rapid match. He ended up winning the next 3 games to eliminate Sevian from the competition. And Caruana bounced back as well from a round 1 loss in his rapid match against Lenier Dominguez. He ended up winning another game to tie that match 2-2, and then Fabi went on to win the Blitz playoff 2-0, knocking Dominguez out of the competition as well. On the women's side, Begim Tokir-Genova managed to defeat Zoe Tang 2.5 to knock Zoe out of the competition, while Jennifer Yu won just an absolute roller coaster of a match against International Master Naisi Pakidze. After starting the rapid 0-2, Jennifer bounced back to win both games and equalize the match 2-2, and then the pair played a wild blitz playoff that featured many mistakes, many flags, and ultimately Jennifer ended up winning that match 5.5, 4.5 after 3 separate blitz matches went the distance. Next up in the elimination bracket, Caruana will face So, while Begim will face Jennifer Yu, as the players keep their tournament chances alive and they try to make it back to the championship final. Now, moving on to the games, we'll start with the Champions Bracket final match in the open section between Levon Aronian and Ray Robson. Here in Game 1 of the Classical, Levon had a bit of a small advantage in this position. This came out of a Sicilian. Here he starts squeezing a bit with the move B3, followed by Rook A4 and C4, securing the knight on B5, and eventually playing against Black's weak pawn on A5. After this move, Queen E4 by Robson, which is probably not the most accurate in the position, Levon traded queens, traded bishops, and after kicking this knight back, F3, Knight F6, Rook A1, Robson realized he has to give up this A-pawn, plays the correct move, Rook D8, followed by Rook to D3, and Black actually does manage to get some significant counterplay here, but being in time trouble, Ray wasn't able to find the most precise continuation here, the most precise way to keep his initiative, and eventually Levon was able to turn this around and win the game. It was around this moment, I believe, this move, Rook to B2, this was likely the losing move. Instead, the engine points out a very difficult move here, Rook H5, leaving the knight hanging on F4 in order to play Rook takes H2 with counterplay. Not an easy thing to find whatsoever. Instead, after Rook to B2, at this point, Robson is already just playing on the 30-second increment. Levon found the very nice knight to D4, hitting the rook. And here after Rook F6, Rook to B3, Black suddenly just lost their coordination, lost the threats in the position, and now White's passed pawns are simply too strong. And here, once again, Ray just wasn't able to generate sufficient counterplay any longer, and Levon's passed pawns simply prevailed in this position. Moving on to their first rapid game, this one was actually very, very equal, but here with just a minute on the clock, Robson ended up making a very, very serious mistake, pawn to A4. The move looks natural, but as it turns out, White is now not going to be in time to defend his d-pawn. So instead, he needed to make any rook move on the d-file, Rook D2, for example, followed by Rook AD1, and then White would be holding this position no problem. Instead, after A4, Rook D8 takes, Queen B3, and Queen to B7. Very nice move from Aronian, defending the b-pawn as well as ganging up on the d5 pawn. Black was able to secure himself an extra pawn here in this position, and although the conversion wasn't at all simple, because Robson was just in heavy time trouble, he wasn't able to hold this position, and eventually Aronian was able to convert a rook and pawn endgame, uh, taking the 2-0 lead in their match, which means tomorrow Robson will have to win both games. He'll have to win the second classical and the second rapid to equalize the score and force a blitz playoff. Moving on to the elimination bracket in the open section. In game one of the match between So and Sevian, Sam Sevian actually ended up winning a very nice game here. We'll start from this moment. This game started off as a French defense, and here Sevian overtook the initiative with the very nice sacrificial idea f4. The point behind this one is that after bishop takes f4, Sevian followed up with rook takes f4. Very nice, very thematic exchange sacrifice where all of a sudden White's king side is just left with too many weaknesses here, and Sevian managed to convert this one quite handily. He just had too much play in this position. The pieces were too active, and eventually Wesley just couldn't defend his king side. Black's initiative here was just very overwhelming. And after queen h5, f3, knight takes d4 was another fantastic shot from Sevian. Rook takes d4, bishop to c5, and White was losing lots of material along the diagonal and ending up with just way too weak of a king to survive. But that was far from the end of the story, as Wesley managed to bounce back immediately in this match, winning 3 straight games, starting with 2 straight games as Black. This was the first of the series here. Wesley definitely in the driver's seat in this position. We have opposite sides, opposite color bishops here in this middle game, and these definitely favor the attacker when you have the initiative with Black definitely attacking on the light squares. And here Wesley just found a fantastic combination. Rook takes h4, sacrificing the rook in order to open up White's king. After g takes h4, queen g4 check, king h2, queen takes h4, king g1. I just want to show you guys the depth of So's calculation here. Of course, this was a rapid game. Bishop to h3. First glance, it looks like this is game over. Black is hitting the queen and threatening queen to g4, followed by queen g2 mate, or bishop g2, followed by queen h1 mate. But So had to see that in response to this move, rook to d4, which would otherwise save White and leave them with an extra rook, he has this cold-blooded retreat queen to h5, simply keeping all of the threats alive. The bishop is, of course, defended. And once again, the queen is hanging and bishop g2 is coming with a clear mating net. Queen d3, bishop g2, and that was the end of the game. So also won the next game, this one in more positional fashion here, playing Black. Black is already a little bit better here, as after the move bishop to e6, So is trading off the light square bishops and securing the c4 square for his knight. Bishop takes e6 was played, queen takes e6, Sevian played knight to d2 to cover the c4 square, but now rook to d8, Black takes over the only open file in the position, queen e2, queen a2, and here So goes pawn grubbing as the b2 pawn is extremely weak and Black's position here is just quite overwhelming. Knight f1, knight c4 was a continuation, knight e3, knight takes e3, and now Sam did not want to play queen takes e3 as the b2 pawn is falling, a3 is falling as well. Instead, he was forced to play fe, but now of course White's structure is long-term extremely weak, and Wesley, after trading off both pairs of rooks, eventually converted this one in the queen and pawn endgame. As you can see, White's pawns here were just way too weak, and despite the equal material, this is actually just a completely losing position here. King to h6, nice find. The king is coming to g5. There are not enough pieces on the board for White to create any threats here, and the g-pawn is simply falling. The e-pawn fell quickly after that as well. Wesley would then go on to win the third game to win this match 3-1 and knock Sevian out of the tournament. Moving on to the other match in the elimination bracket, this one once again started with a win for Dominguez, who did not end up winning this match. In this first game against Caruana, it was at this point that Caruana went fairly wrong here in this position. This came out of a queen's gambit declined. Quite a sharp position. According to Compy, g takes h5 was the only move for White to try and keep the balance here. Even here, I think this would be very unclear, and it seems like Black is doing well after knight takes h5. Instead, Fabi chose to move rook ag1, which is very natural, keeping the pawn on g4. The problem is that after hg, fg, he ends up giving up the e4 square, and Dominguez just kind of masterfully uses this one to his advantage. c5 is played, h5, white is attacking on the king side, but black's counterplay here is actually very, very fast. C takes d4, c takes d4, e takes d4, now knight e4 check, and here Caruana actually makes a surprisingly difficult decision. Knight takes e4, rook takes e4. After this one, it turns out black's advantage is actually quite overwhelming. The only move for white was king to g2. This would at least keep the balance. But after knight e4, rook e4, queen f3, and queen to b6, Dominguez was able to crash through on the queen side with queen takes b2, as well as rook a8 coming, and Caruana's counterplay here was simply not in time. He gives up a couple of pawns, looking for any kind of chances he can find on the king side, but there was simply no threats, and Dominguez was able to convert this one quite smoothly. Fabi was then able to draw the next two games and then win the fourth game on demand. We go to the critical moment from that game. Here we have an endgame with equal material, and this game was fairly balanced up until this point, but now with a big time advantage in the rapid game, 7 minutes, or 5-6 minutes extra, I think, at this point, Caruana was able to really put the squeeze on. Starting with the break g4. Here, after takes, what he's doing is he's opening up the g file and creating a second weakness. As you can see, white is already putting pressure on the b6 pawn, the c5 pawn is a potential target, and now he's ready to switch over and start hammering away at this g6 pawn. After knight h6 check, king to h3, knight f5, Dominguez not a lot of time and just trying to move back and forth. Rook to g1, this was already very, very unpleasant for black. h5, knight e7, h takes g6, knight takes here. Knight takes g6 here was possible, as rook g2 or rook f6 is met with rook h8 check, but white has a lot of moves to keep the advantage here. For example, rook to g3, followed by hiding the king, and black would be experiencing very serious problems here. Instead, rook h8 check, king g3, knight takes g6, rook f1, rook f6. Fabi's technique here was fairly straightforward, just going after the queenside pawns. Eventually, rook to b1 is found, knight to d6, and at this point, Dominguez basically collapsed. He's just not in time to defend. If rook to b7, then of course there's knight takes c5 with a pin along the b file. Knight d6 was played, but after takes, rook takes b6, rook e2, check, followed by rook f2. Caruana was in control here. He's already up one pawn in the rook and pawn endgame, and he was able to win the a pawn and eventually convert this and force the blitz playoff. Moving to that first blitz game, this one was pretty equal throughout, but Caruana managed to get the best of Dominguez in the final time scramble. Here we pick up the game in a rook and knight endgame. Fabi in this position played knight to g5, definitely a good try, threatening the f7 pawn, and of course inviting black to take, where after h takes g5 here, this would be a fantastic rook endgame for white, with black having just way too many pawn weaknesses. The only move to keep the game alive was to play rook a2 here, threatening the mate on f2. This would force white to come back with knight h3, because knight takes e4, this is not what white wants to do and fix black structure. Dominguez, seconds on his clock, plays knight takes c5, but now after rook takes f7, white is simply picking up the entire kingside and winning a lot of material here. Knight e4, rook takes f5, that's one pawn. H pawn is going to be gone too, which means that white will soon be up 2 pawns. Knight d2 check was played, rook a2, but now knight h3, just very, very cool move, defending f2 ahead of time and getting ready to pick up that second pawn on the h file. Dominguez tried to hold on here, but with 2 extra pawns and the rook coming back, and white's h pawn, of course, now being very, very fast. Of course, the finish to this endgame was quite sharp, but eventually Fabi simply didn't let go. The g pawn runs here, c2, rook c8, and that was the end of the game, as white stops black's only hope, the c pawn, and of course, his pawns are going to be promoting very, very soon. Caruana would then go on to win the second blitz game as well as black, winning the blitz playoff 2-0 and sending Dominguez out of the tournament. Moving on to the women's section, we'll start with the champions bracket final between Irina Krush and Alice Lee. This is actually a three-peat These two players met in the finals in both previous editions of the American Cup. Irina was successful in both tournaments, winning both events. But this is the third time around, and we've seen with every tournament, Alice Lee, she just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And of course, this is her third chance to go at the champ. In this first game, however, things did not go Alice's way. Irina decided to go for the King's Indian attack. Quite an interesting choice, as this allowed her to build up a very, very nice and perspectful attacking position on the king side. For a6 here, knight to d7, white's play is very, very natural and thematic, and Alice ended up making a very, very thematic mistake with this move c4. This allowed Irina to just completely close up the center with d4, and already here white's advantage is close to decisive. The problem for black is that there's simply not enough counterplay on the queen side, whereas white's play on the king side is coming and coming quickly. h5, h6, ideas of bishop to g5 as well as knight to g5, all of white's pieces aiming at the queen side. This was already a very, very dangerous position for Alice Lee. Now, she managed to make things quite messy. Irina did not prosecute the attack in the best possible way. Here after bishop to g5, f5 was played. I think f6 was better, but anyways, knight takes f6, knight e5. Alice actually managed to scramble her way back to a reasonable position, but it was always difficult for black here to keep the balance. After g6, takes, knight e3, Irina starts playing for a type of good knight against bad bishop advantage. And here I think Alice kind of plays into her hands a bit with knight takes e5. Instead, maybe knight d6 was better, just keeping more pieces on the board, not making this super easy for white. That said, after knight takes e5 and takes, Alice did have one more chance to save this game, although it was quite difficult to find, though I do want to just point it out for the fans. After knight c4, takes, it was in this position actually she had a fantastic opportunity to go rook takes f4, sacrificing the rook in order to open up white's king. The point being, after queen takes h4 check, king to g1, and very, very powerful move e3, opening up the bishop on b7. Apparently black had enough here for the draw, the key line being that if rook d7 check, winning the bishop on b7, after queen g3 check, it turns out black has a perpetual and can save the game. That very, very difficult to find, especially with little time on the clock. Instead, rook to f8 was played in the game, but now Irina is simply able to take over the position. The knight comes to d6, and black was never able to get any more counterplay in this game. e3 played, but it's a little bit too little, too late. Rook e1, queen takes a5, and here white's queen just picks up the entire queen side. g5 was the final mistake, allowing knight to f5 and winning black's queen. Now, in the second game of this match, Irina was actually dominating the rapid game. Pick it up at this position, close to move 30, with black just having a ton of strategic advantages here, basically better bishop, better structure, play on the d-file, everything going in Irina's way, time advantage as well. But unfortunately, she ended up squandering this advantage. Rook d1, king f8, king e1, bishop takes c4. Things seem to be going absolutely great here for black. Queen takes d3. The rook endgame is completely lost, as black's rook is just way too active, and black is already up some material here. But after h4 check and queen h1, it looked like Irina was going to win this in the middle game, but Alice found her absolute last chance to stay alive, and it ends up working out. e5. Now, this move is basically just a last-ditch effort to create some counterplay, looking to maybe take on f6, push e6, but also to go rook takes f4. And what this does, this creates a square for white's king to escape. Irina played the move rook to d1, but now after rook takes f4, it's not clear actually how black wins this. Queen g1 check allows king to g3, and then there's no clear mate. So instead, what Irina needed to do was play f takes e5 here, and just take the pawn. After queen takes e5, for example, black can go queen takes h4 check, rook to d2 check. There's many wins, but this would have been game over. Instead, rook to d1 was played, and after rook takes f4, black did have a winning move here, g5. The idea of rook takes f6 check, king to g7, but yeah, good luck finding this, with not much time on the clock. But the point here is that white's king ends up being in just grave danger. Queen takes h4 is a huge threat, and it turns out that black will still win here. But this being difficult to find, Irina played queen g1 check, king g3, and rook to e1. But now queen d3, another clutch move from Alice. Rook takes e5 and queen d8 check. White had a perpetual here, and a draw was soon agreed. So Alice able to save this one, though she's still going to be a full point down in this match heading into tomorrow's 2 games in the champions bracket. Moving on to the elimination bracket for the women. First off, Begim Tokirjanova managed to defeat Zoe Tang 2.5 in their match. Their first game was drawn. This is the second game. And Begim went for a very, very interesting continuation here in this position. This comes from a Semislav. She plays the move g6, allowing bishop h6. Of course, this move is aimed at stopping White's knight from coming to f5, which would be quite annoying. And here, after bishop h6, she sacrifices the exchange and plays the move e takes d4. The interesting thing is that Compi actually likes c takes d4 with the same idea to sacrifice the exchange, but this structure seems to be quite favorable for Black, not giving White as much counterplay in the on the e file, giving Black the c file as well. In any case, after e takes d4, takes, although objectively this position is supposed to be equal for White, in the practical aspect of things, it turned out to be a little bit easier for Black to play, and Begim was able to eventually overtake and win this one. After takes on g3, takes on e4, she picks up another pawn here for the exchange, giving Black 2 pawns for the exchange. Now takes, queen to d6. Problem for White is that Black's pieces are coming in, the knight is coming to e5, and these 2 protected passers in the middle of the board are obviously very, very strong. So queen f1, king g7 was played, bishop takes a6, picking up a pawn, but knight e5, and Black's pawns here are just way too strong. White's pawn is far too slow, and Begim was soon able to win this one with a pretty direct attack against White's king. Knight e2 check here was the finish, queen c5, and queen g1 was made on the board. Begim would then win the 3rd game of this match as well to take the match 2.5 and advance to the next stage of the elimination bracket. That brings us to basically the most exciting match of the day. This is a match between Ayam Nazi Paikidze against Jennifer Yu. This match went back and forth. It started off with 2 straight victories for Nazi. This was the first rapid game where she ended up converting this endgame with 3 pass pawns on the king side against Black's lowly a pawn. Apparently, Jennifer actually could have still defended this position after f5. This was a bit of a mistake, allowing king to e5. Here it turns out maybe Black could have survived this with an active king, but Jennifer, I think she was probably in severe time trouble at this point. Not a lot of time to figure this out. Said king f6, h4 was played, check, king to e1, and yeah, not seeing a way to stop the pawns. Jennifer sacrifices the bishop here, but after knight takes g4, king takes f5, knight f2, White was able to hold on to this h-pawn and win this game thanks to the extra piece. After king g3, h6, Jennifer kept trying but wasn't able to save this one. Nazi would then win the 2nd game in the rapid here in this position, with White having a nice advantage here, rook da1 being the top move suggested by the engine. Jennifer decided to sacrifice the exchange on d3 here, removing the very annoying knight on d3. But the problem is, in the resulting position, White's knights on c4 and a5 simply weren't all that impressive and soon would start to hang as Black just has way too much pressure here. Knight to b4 was played, queen to b3, king h8, and now all of a sudden the knight on a5 is trapped and Black is winning more material. Queen c3, rook takes a5, takes, rook takes a5. Black was left with an extra piece and was able to convert this one. So now behind in the match by a full 2 points, Jennifer would have to win 2 games on demand, and she managed to do so. First, starting with this endgame, playing with the white pieces, she was trying to convert an extra pawn and managed to do so. First with the nice move here, f3, restricting Black's light-scored bishop, and then rook f2, restricting the active rook on b2. Here after rook to b5, a4, Black's rook was forced to move away from the d-pawn, and now knight e7 check, knight takes d5, allowed White to pick up a second pawn, and then Jennifer was able to convert this endgame to start the comeback. Then in the second game, Jennifer managed to win fairly drawn rook and pawn endgame. Of course, she always had the extra pawn, and these are rarely simple to hold, especially in the time scramble. Actually, at this moment, Black could have won the game with the move king to g4, heading to f3. The main point here, and this is quite an instructive line, is that if rook takes e4, king to f3, this is actually a winning rook and pawn endgame for Black. For example, rook to b4, Black gives check, king to d2, and now not king takes f2 because Black would lose the last pawn on f4, but rook to f1 instead, and this would be winning. Rook takes f2, and White will not be able to stop the f-pawn from here. Instead, of course, we had one of several crazy time scrambles of the day, and eventually Jennifer managed to trick Nazi here, bringing the rook around first to e2, then back over to f1, and once again check, another check. The king is forced very far away. If king to e3 here, there's rook to d3 mate, and after king to c3, it's basically over as Black is going after the f-pawn here, king to f4, king g4, and now very nice find by Jen, king h3, heading to g2, and White's king is simply too far to save this one. So rook g7 was tried, but now e3, the final breakthrough, takes f2. Jennifer was able to complete the comeback in the rapid, forcing the blitz playoff. However, the drama was just starting there. Now, the way these blitz playoffs work in the American Cup, whether you have a playoff from the champions bracket or the elimination bracket, the playoff structure is the same. The players play 2 blitz games. If you have a winner after 2 games, someone wins 2-0 or 1.5-1/2, then that's it. If it's tied after 2 blitz games, you don't go to Armageddon, you just play another set of 2 blitz games. If it's tied again, you just play another 2 blitz games, and basically you keep going, you keep playing until there's a clear winner after a set of 2 games. And this match simply just wouldn't end. In the first game, Jennifer was actually pushing in this rook endgame, but in this position ends up flagging, losing on time with just seconds left on her clock as she was trying to get the move a3 here down on the board. A big win for Nazi, who then takes a full point lead in the blitz match. This would force Jennifer to have to win the second game on demand. That did not look like it was going to happen. In this game, Nazi managed to get 2 bishops against the rook in an endgame, in a position that's actually winning for Black. She plays a move like king to f7, king f8. Black should be able to convert this one. Instead, Nazi made a very unfortunate blunder, and honestly surprising blunder. Bishop takes a3, where after rook to e7, all of a sudden it turns out that Black cannot save both of her bishops. Bishop to c8 runs into rook e8 check, bishop a6 runs into rook a7, and all of a sudden it's a study-like position on the board where Black is losing a minor piece. Jennifer is able to now get a position where she has the extra exchange. And although this one is not easy to convert by any means, especially with few seconds on the clock, White was able to do so here. First, bringing in the king and trading off some pawns. I mean, this one just went back and forth, back and forth. But long story short, this endgame was always winning for White, and Jennifer did manage to show good enough technique here to eventually convert. I'll just show you guys the final moments here. King e6, rook f7. Of course, the players are going back and forth, trying to figure out how to play this position. And finally, this move f5. This made things very, very difficult for Black with a quick rook c6 check, h4, and White going after the h-pawn. Bishop c5 was played, h4, bishop f2, now check, king to g5, and it was simply all over. Now equalizing the score, the two would play another pair of blitz games. In this first one here, Jennifer managed to win a piece early on with the shot b4 in this position, trapping the bishop on a5 and taking advantage of the pin on the c-file. C takes b4, queen takes c6, left White with an extra piece, and then Jennifer managed to convert this one here. But then in the second game, just needing half a point to clinch the match, Jennifer actually had a completely winning position on the board, extra piece, Nazi scrambling just to create some counterplay, and all of a sudden things started to go very, very wrong for Black in this position. Nazi plays the move rook e7 check, king to g8 was the response. And now Nazi found the very, very annoying move, knight f7, threatening ideas of knight takes h6 check. And you can imagine in a blitz game, you know, your brain starts panicking. Rook takes b7 is hanging as well. And you're worried that you're about to get mated. So Jen tries queen a1 check here, rook e1, the only move. Now black just needed to keep her cool, play a move like queen to c3, and she's still winning. White doesn't have any decisive threats. Instead, Jen decides to sacrifice the queen on e1, just trying to get a move off in time and not flag. Queen takes e1, king takes f7. Okay, queen e7 check here was winning for white. Instead, f3 was played, rook e8, and here we end up in an endgame with queen against 3 pieces. Objectively, I think black has a big advantage here. In a blitz time scramble, of course, anything can happen. And if anything, it might be even easier to just play with the queen here, as you only have 1 piece to move. You don't have to worry about which piece to move, what's hanging. Unfortunately for Jen, she ends up hanging her flag for the 2nd time in this match, not getting her rook move off in time and losing the game, allowing Nazi to come back. This takes us to the 3rd blitz match. Now, the first game in this match was actually drawn, the only draw of the day between these two. We move on to the 2nd game here with Jennifer playing white, and she, after a pretty messy game, she was able to get a completely winning position here, but all chaos broke loose after Nazi found the move queen takes f2 check in this position, king h1, now queen takes e1. Nice queen sacrifice here in order to play knight f2 check, winning back the queen on h3. But we end up in this endgame. Earlier, white was up a piece. Here, white has 2 pieces for the rook and still a completely decisive advantage. Of course, in the time scramble, there's so many nerves and so many mistakes being made by both players. This one was a huge scramble back and forth. I think both players here were just absolutely exhausted after such a long day of chess. Jennifer ended up winning this one here, bringing her king up. I mean, this was just, yeah, all kinds of stuff going on. I just want to show you guys, Nazi had one final chance to actually save this game. This would have, I think, just turned the match into just into an even longer endeavor. Here, I mean, white is totally winning, but yeah, not much time. And this was the final moment here after king to g6. Nazi could have kept the match alive with the shot rook takes f6, sacrificing the rook in order to take white's last pawn off the board, leaving the players in a rook and knight against rook endgame, which is actually not that difficult for black to hold, even in blitz. After missing this last chance, of course, with rook to g4 check, it was all completely over. Bishop g5, king c7, h5, and Jennifer found a very clutch move here, knight to e5 check, with the winning fork, picking up the rook on g4, and that was all over. Jennifer won the 2nd game of this match, winning this blitz match 1.5 to 0.5, and knocking Nazi Kostya out of the tournament. So yeah, an absolutely crazy day here in St. Louis at the American Cup. Tomorrow we'll see the conclusion of the Champions Bracket Finals with Levon Aronian leading Ray Robson 2-0, Irina Krush leading Alice Lee 1.5. And we'll also see the next match in the elimination bracket, Fabi Caruana taking on Wesley So in the open section, and Begim Tokirjanova taking on Jennifer Yu in the women's section. The winner of that match will then play the loser of the current Champions Bracket Finals. If the results stay the same, that means, you know, Robson and Alice Lee would be going down to the elimination bracket. But hey, right now it's way too close to call. We'll see what happens in tomorrow's day 6. Thank you folks for tuning in. This has been International Master Kostya Kavutskiy here from St. Louis. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.